There's an idea, rarely discussed and perhaps a bit unsettling, about time. It suggests that time doesn't run in a straight line but organizes itself in rhythms, as if reality itself had heartbeats, cycles that repeat on different scales. Modern physics confirms that time isn't the same for everyone. It depends on speed, gravity, and how each observer perceives it. In certain experiments, scientists have observed particles behaving as if they were dancing in repeating temporal patterns, a kind of order that reappears through time. And this is precisely where science and ancient wisdom meet. Thoth, the master of time, spoke about this long ago, not in the language of physics, but in the language of consciousness. To him, time was a living force, something that responds to the vibration of the mind. When consciousness changes, time changes, and there are specific moments, what he called folds of time, when reality reorganizes itself, opening new possibilities of existence. These moments are like subtle portals, points where one timeline can transform into another. Today, quantum physics calls this the collapse of possibilities, the instant when something undefined becomes defined through observation.
Neuroscience also shows that the mind reconstructs the past and anticipates the future within fractions of a second, creating the illusion of continuity. In other words, the brain creates time, and consciousness sets the rhythm. Perhaps that's why Thoth was remembered throughout history as the guardian of the keys to reality. To the ancients, he wasn't just a god or a sage. He symbolized the universal intelligence that understands how dimensions work.
And his teachings, when translated into modern language, speak of something science is only beginning to touch: the existence of multiple realities coexisting, ready to be accessed when consciousness shifts its frequency. Today, we won't look at Thoth as a mythological figure, but as a symbol of timeless knowledge. We'll explore what I call the hidden timeline trigger, the point where life seems to bend, and everything that appeared fixed begins to move. It's the instant when old patterns dissolve and new versions of reality begin to form. If you've ever felt your life take a sudden turn, as if the universe had quietly changed direction, you may have already touched one of these triggers. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. But first, remember to subscribe and stay connected to this space. Each new reflection here expands our collective consciousness, and your presence is part of that. Because when you begin to understand time, time begins to understand you. When people talk about Thoth, many immediately think of the Emerald Tablets, texts said to have been written millennia ago, containing the so-called secrets of creation. But it's important here to separate fact from symbol. Historically, the earliest references to Thoth come from ancient Egypt, where he was regarded as the scribe of the gods, the lord of language and measure. Centuries later, his figure merged with that of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, and the Hermetic texts began blending philosophy, science, and spirituality. The popular version known today as the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean is, in fact, a modern reinterpretation, written in the 20th century by an author named Maurice Doreal. Yet the symbolic power of these ideas endures. They speak of the invisible structure of reality and humanity's ability to interact with it. In the tablets, Thoth describes time as a spiral, not something that runs, but something that turns. He suggests that each rotation of time brings the opportunity to awaken a new level of consciousness. It's as if reality repeats itself in cycles until the observer shifts frequency and accesses a higher layer. Interestingly, this vision is not far from modern physics, which speaks of parallel universes, folded dimensions, and superposed states. In spiritual terms, we would say that every choice creates a new reality. In scientific terms, every decision collapses a probability. At their core, both describe the same phenomenon, the mind as the central point of creation. Thoth taught that time is a tool, not a prison, and when a human being understands their vibrational nature, they begin to notice the folds, the moments when destiny becomes malleable. These folds are subtle. They occur when you change the way you perceive the world, when you stop reacting and begin observing. Physics might call this a change of reference frame. Hermeticism might call it an elevation of consciousness. Both refer to the same ability, to alter the field of reality simply by changing the point of observation. But what actually happens in those moments when reality seems to respond instantly to consciousness? Why do certain thoughts, decisions, or encounters produce effects that defy logic? In the next segment, we'll step into that territory, where science and mysticism unite to explain how the human mind becomes the instrument that activates Thoth's hidden timeline trigger. And what you're about to hear may change the way you understand time, and perhaps the very sense of who you are. The human mind is one of the most complex and mysterious technologies in the universe. It doesn't just record time, it manufactures it. That may sound philosophical, but it's pure neuroscience. When you recall something, your brain doesn't press play on a video from the past. It reconstructs the memory in the present, gathering fragments, images, sounds, emotions, and sensations stored in different brain regions. Each time you remember, the brain literally repaints the event, like an artist recreating the same scene with new colors. So every memory is a fresh version, influenced by who you are right now. That has profound implications. It means the past isn't fixed inside you. It's malleable. When someone relives a painful memory, for example, the brain brings the event into the present with the same emotional charge. But if that person can observe the memory without merging with it, perhaps with a sense of understanding, forgiveness, or empowerment, the brain reconsolidates the memory differently. Neuroscience calls this memory reconsolidation. The event doesn't change, but the meaning does, and meaning reshapes chemistry. The emotion fades, the body relaxes, and new neural connections form that no longer carry pain, but clarity. That's why so many emotional healing processes work. They don't erase the past. They transform its vibration. And when the vibration changes, so does the timeline it sustains. The past stops being a prison and becomes a source of wisdom. The body stops repeating the stress hormones of trauma, and the mind opens new pathways toward coherence and inner peace. Thoth once said, "Time is the shadow of the movement of light. Light is consciousness. Time is the shadow it casts as it moves through experience." When you shift the direction of that light, in other words, the way you perceive what you've lived, the shadow changes shape. And what once seemed like an unchangeable past can become a portal of evolution. When consciousness moves, time changes. Science is beginning to catch up with this. Joe Dispenza, in his book, Becoming Supernatural, describes personal and collective experiences where elevated states of consciousness, reached through focus, coherence, and presence, led to measurable changes in brain patterns, physiology, and even gene expression. He recounts moments where time seemed to dissolve. People entered a state of expansion beyond past or future, pure awareness. And in that timelessness, improbable events began to occur. Healings, synchronicities, insights. From a neuroscientific perspective, this happens because the brain enters coherence, synchronizing its hemispheres and freeing the body from the repetitive cycle of stress and emotional memory. What Dispenza calls becoming supernatural, Thoth called the point of light convergence. It's the instant when all your versions, the one who suffered, the one who healed, the one who still searches, meet. For a brief moment, time folds in on itself, and consciousness chooses which version continues. That moment is the true timeline trigger. It isn't outside you. It's an inner state of clarity, coherence, and choice. And how do we reach that point? Not through technique, but through awareness. It happens when you stop reacting and start observing. When a familiar pattern arises, a thought, an emotion, a situation, and instead of replaying the pain, you pause and witness. That instant of awareness interrupts the loop, and what once looked like destiny reveals itself as choice. This is happening constantly, whether we notice it or not. Every thought is an energetic decision, and every emotion, a quantum command that informs the field around us. The difference is that most of us do it unconsciously. That's why realities repeat. But once consciousness awakens, time stops being a sequence of repetitions and becomes a spiral of ascension. In the next segment, we'll enter the heart of this phenomenon. You'll understand how consciousness communicates with the field and how the universe responds almost instantly to each coherent state within you. It's the point where science begins to touch the invisible, and the invisible reveals its science. And perhaps when you grasp this, you'll see that the true power to change time isn't in going back to the past, but in changing how you illuminate it. When consciousness enters coherence, the universe begins to respond, not in a mystical or miraculous way, but naturally, like one field vibrating in harmony with another. Everything in the universe is made of energy and information. Every thought, emotion, or intention you emit generates a wave that moves through the field. And when that wave finds resonance, when it matches similar frequencies, it reorganizes matter, encounters, and even life events. This is where synchronicities are born. You think of someone, and they appear. You decide to change direction, and circumstances align in ways that seem impossible to explain. Physics would call this entanglement, the principle that two particles, once connected, remain linked and influence each other instantaneously. But at the level of consciousness, it's more than entanglement, it's communication. Thoth called it the language of light, a dialogue between the visible and the invisible, between the human and the field. When a person lives in presence, they become an emitter of coherence, and the field, being intelligent, responds, not because the universe conspires, but because the frequency you emit reorganizes the fabric of reality around you. That's how thoughts become events, emotions become coincidences, and inner states mirror themselves in the physical world. So when we speak of manifestation, we're not talking about magic, we're talking about physics applied to consciousness. Joe Dispenza describes this same phenomenon in his studies of the human electromagnetic field. During deep meditative states, instruments recorded real changes around the body, increases in coherence, harmony, and measurable energy amplitude. These readings show that when you enter coherence, you literally emit a new vibrational signature, and the field recognizes it. It's the scientific version of what the ancients called living prayer, the state where thought and emotion vibrate as one. Thoth said, "That which is illuminated by consciousness becomes obedient to consciousness." In other words, what you observe clearly transforms. Attention is the instrument of creation, and sustained focus is what activates the timeline trigger, the moment when the universe stops reacting and begins responding. Perhaps you've already experienced this without realizing it. That moment when you decide something with absolute certainty and suddenly doors open, or when you feel compelled to be somewhere without knowing why, and something crucial happens. These are not coincidences, they're alignments. They are the field reorganizing itself around your dominant vibration. But there's something deeper here, because if the universe responds, it also teaches. And sometimes Before aligning with what you desire, it must dismantle what no longer matches your frequency. That's why moments of chaos, doubt, or loss often precede timeline shifts. It's as if the field must collapse old structures to make room for a new frequency. In the next segment, we'll talk about exactly that. The signs that you're about to cross into a new timeline. How to recognize when the field is reorganizing itself, and why many confuse this process with regression when it's actually expansion on another plane. What comes next may change how you interpret what you call problems, because perhaps they're simply the prelude to a quantum leap. There are moments in life when everything seems to fall apart. Relationships dissolve, plans lose meaning, opportunities vanish, and you feel as if something inside time itself has fractured. But what few realize is that this apparent collapse is the clearest sign that a new timeline is opening. The field doesn't destroy what's essential. It only dismantles what's no longer in resonance. Every vibrational shift requires space. And the first thing the universe does, before lifting you higher, is to remove what doesn't match the new frequency. That's why, when your consciousness expands, the external world sometimes seems to fall apart. Old friends drift away, behaviors break down, the body reacts, and the mind clings to what it knows. But this isn't punishment, it's frequency adjustment. The field is reorganizing the variables of your life so that everything vibrates in coherence with your new identity. Physics calls this necessary entropy, the chaos that precedes order. In any transforming system, old structures disorganize before reforming into a new pattern. In spiritual language, we call it purification, symbolic death, or timeline shift. It's the same principle. The old must dissolve so the new can manifest. You've probably lived through this, a phase where you lost everything, a job, a relationship, a purpose, and only later realized it was clearing the path for something far greater. At the time, it felt like the end. But it was only the fold, the moment when time bent and reality began to reorganize around your new vibration. Thoth said that light, before ascending, must first know its own shadow. And perhaps that's what the field does. It reveals where resistance, fear, or attachment still reside. These emotions aren't enemies. They're indicators that the old timeline is still active. The key isn't to fight the discomfort, but to observe it until it dissolves. Because everything truly seen by consciousness transforms. So if you feel like you're in the middle of chaos, understand, it may be the beginning of the leap. Reality is merely calibrating your frequency, and the more you try to return to the old, the more resistance you feel. Expansion doesn't happen by running away. It happens through surrender. And surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means allowing the new to reveal itself. Then, something becomes visible. Signs begin to multiply. You notice coincidences that feel like messages, dreams that anticipate meetings, numbers repeating, words aligning like answers. These synchronicities aren't random. They're the field guiding you along the new path. Each one is confirmation that your vibration is already syncing with the higher line. But there's something even more extraordinary, because the field doesn't just respond, it speaks. And what comes next is the core of this journey: how to interpret that silent language, how to recognize the signals confirming your leap, and how to consciously anchor the new timeline. What's coming isn't theory. It's the moment when you'll learn how to read the universe. Everything that exists is vibration, and vibration organizes itself through information. That's why the field responds not only to what you feel, but also to what you communicate. Words are frequencies. They carry patterns that shape how reality responds. Every time you speak, think, or write with intention, you emit a vibrational signature. And the universe, Being sensitive to coherence responds to that signature. This is why what you express, aloud, in thought, or in writing, matters far more than you think. When Thoth said that the word is the bridge between the invisible and the visible, he was describing exactly this mechanism. The vibration within language is the most direct tool for shaping the quantum field. And here the ancient and modern meet. Science shows that the brain and heart generate electromagnetic fields that change with emotion and intention. In other words, the language of consciousness is literal. Every affirmation is an energetic command. That's why the affirmations you leave here, in the comments or in your personal journal, are more than words. They are vibration codes. When you write, read, and repeat them consciously, you create an energetic circuit that reprograms the mind and anchors this new timeline into your field. So when I invite you to comment, it's not just to engage the video. It's to feed the collective flow of consciousness. It's an anchoring exercise. Daily repetition turns vibration into identity. So if you wish to seal this understanding right now, write here or for yourself. I consciously choose the frequency that creates my world. Repeat this phrase over the next few days, aloud or silently. Let it become the soundtrack of your vibrational field, because every time you speak it, the universe reorganizes its particles around that new coherence. And gradually, everything that doesn't match it begins to dissolve, naturally, effortlessly. Physics describes this as self-organization, the point where a system enters coherence and begins to attract only compatible frequencies. A spiritual teacher might call it manifestation. A Hermetic philosopher would call it the law of correspondence. But all speak of the same principle. The field responds to the dominant vibration. And when that vibration remains stable, something remarkable happens. Reality starts reorganizing almost immediately. Events, people, and opportunities appear effortlessly, as if drawn by an invisible magnetism. This isn't coincidence, it's vibrational mathematics. Coherence creates attraction. Confusion creates dispersion. So consciously affirming what you choose isn't naive optimism, it's science applied to consciousness. In the next minutes, we'll talk about how to sustain this state, how to maintain vibrational coherence even when the outer world tries to pull you back into the old pattern. Because that's where the real timeline shift happens, not in the moment of inspiration, but in the maintenance of the new frequency. And it's at that point that Thoth's final secret begins to reveal itself. Maintaining a new frequency is harder than reaching it for the first time. Anyone can feel a moment of expansion, that sense of clarity, lightness, and connection. But the real work begins afterward, when daily life tries to pull you back into old patterns of thought and reaction. That's when most people give up the process and, without realizing it, return to the previous timeline. The mind is like a magnetic field. It tends to repeat what it knows. And the brain, driven by the need for safety, tries to save energy by replaying mapped patterns. Neuroscience calls this directed neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through conscious repetition. The problem is that, when we're unconscious, habit repeats. But when we're aware, intention repeats, and that changes everything. Thoth said, "He who keeps the light steady within chaos becomes the law of time itself." In modern terms, that means whoever maintains coherence amid challenge creates vibrational stability, and therefore stable reality. Life stops swinging between extremes and begins to flow in harmony. But how do we sustain coherence? It's not about perfection, it's about presence. It's about recognizing the exact moment an old emotion tries to take over and choosing not to identify with it. It's taking a deep breath, observing and remembering. I am not the fear, I am the consciousness observing it. Every time you do that, you interrupt an old neural cycle and create a new one. And with each conscious choice, the body learns that the new state is safe. That's the essence of vibrational reprogramming. Joe Dispenza illustrates this in his experiments on heart-brain coherence. He found that when people sustain an elevated emotion, such as gratitude, love, or awe, for long enough, the heart and brain synchronize, their waves harmonize, and the electromagnetic field expands. In simple terms, the entire body begins to vibrate in unison, and in that state, time behaves differently. Perception widens, intuition strengthens, and life responds in real time. Spiritual traditions call this the state of grace. Physics might call it field coherence, but the experience is the same, a flow where everything aligns naturally. You no longer force the future. You attract it by maintaining your vibration. And that only happens when mind and heart are aligned with clear intention and elevated emotion. Sustaining the new frequency, then, isn't about controlling what happens, but choosing how to vibrate in the face of what happens. It's understanding that every challenge is an invitation to coherence, and every conscious choice is a subtle leap in timelines. Thoth said, "The initiate perceives the cycle before the cycle imprisons him." It means that when you learn to recognize patterns before reacting, time loses its power to repeat you. You become the center of the spiral, the still point around which the universe turns. In the next and final segment, we'll reveal Thoth's ultimate legacy, the deeper purpose behind all this knowledge. Because when an individual awakens to the mastery of time, something much greater unfolds. Humanity itself begins to vibrate on a higher scale. And perhaps that's exactly what's happening now. Thoth never spoke of power in the way we humans usually understand it. His deepest teaching wasn't about controlling time. It was about remembering that we are part of it. For him, time was a living consciousness, and the human being, one of its mirrors. When consciousness awakens, time becomes flexible. When it sleeps, time becomes a prison. And perhaps that's why he said, "He who knows the light masters the cycle of shadow." Today, science begins to translate that ancient wisdom into modern language. We call it neuroplasticity, heart coherence, quantum physics. But at its essence, it's the same truth, the capacity of consciousness to shape reality. Every thought is a vibrational choice. Every emotion is a thread of energy weaving the fabric of the real. And once you become aware of this, you realize that the universe was never against you. It was always a mirror of what you sustain within. Thoth's true hidden timeline trigger isn't found in emerald tablets or ancient symbols. It's in the instant you realize that reality is interactive, that time responds, that consciousness creates, and that every act of presence, every intentional choice, every moment of silence is a rewriting of destiny. That's where time bends, not to serve you, but to align with the purpose of your own evolution. You don't need to be a master from Egypt to live this. You just need to observe, to notice the moment when the mind wants to repeat and the heart wants to expand. In that moment, choose expansion, choose coherence, choose the frequency that creates your world. Because, as Thoth said, he who perceives the light within the darkness transforms both into wisdom. And remember, every time you share an insight, write a phrase, or express gratitude, the field changes. Not just yours, everyone's. Each awakened mind is a point of light on the map of collective consciousness. And when those lights begin to shine together, the planet itself changes frequency. That is the true leap, not individual, but collective. Awakening is not a destination. It's a continuous process of remembering. And every time you remember, time aligns a little more with your truth. There's no rush. Time works in favor of those who vibrate in coherence. If this message resonated with you, share it. Help expand this field of consciousness, because every awakened soul illuminates hundreds of others. Leave your comment, your vibration, your testimony, not just for engagement, but because your energy is part of this collective construction. And remember, the highest timeline is not a place in the future. It is a state of being, available here and now. May you walk in peace, clarity, and love until the next awakening.